talking about coincidences today. Coincidences that we, we can't really believe are coincidences sometimes, and that this is happening on an almost daily basis as we are what they call gang stalking. Gang stalking today is what once was COINTELPRO and MK Ultra, and it seems to be combined with many other of these programs, projects, and called gang stalking. A kind of confusing, bothersome term to many people, but anyway, what we did was watch a movie that we saw 20 years ago called Conspiracy Theory. And I've been saying I'd never heard of MK Ultra. In fact, I put it in writing. I've mentioned it. I've just never heard of it. Why not? Because it was covered. It was very well buried by the coverts, we think. And yet, this movie shows MK Ultra in action, and I couldn't believe it. Why did I not remember that I'd heard of this project before, before this time? Why did I not remember MK Ultra as being part of this movie? It shows some of the things that might have happened that probably did, but much worse things from what we can gather in the documentaries that have been made about this, and the literature that has been passed down, and in the testimonies of the victims of MK Ultra. Why did we not know that we had been exposed to it in this movie? Well, for one thing, I thought it was a fiction movie, so they would have a fiction project like this. It was too horrible to imagine that this thing could have been real. I mean, where outside of a Nazi concentration camp would we ever think that this the kinds of torture, mind control mind manipulation could be going on? And it brought us to a point that we took notes on some of the other things that were obvious in this film that are still with us for the most part today. They are, well, one thing we didn't mention, I don't think you noted the fluoride in the toothpaste as being a problem, but it's still with us today. There has been no real reduction that I know about in the use of fluoride in city water and toothpaste and whatever. I'm not sure. There still is some controversy about this, but the important thing is if they had, if MK Ultra was mentioned in this film, as it was, and sometime the actual laboratory scenes, the torture being administered to the main character, it seems that this would be quite a bit for a covert group to want to leave out there. That they would want to cover this up somehow, and it surprised me that it stayed out there for several years, and then suddenly it sort of disappeared. Why did it disappear? Well, the main character was possibly a reason, since there's talk of his being blacklisted, as many of us. And having problems that were similar to rage problems, having blowing up at this or that, and just getting uncontrollable. And when I first heard about that, I don't keep up with Hollywood gossip very much, but when I first heard about it, I thought, well, this is horrible. But you know what? The same thing is happening to me. So it must be maybe something when you hit 50, 55 years old, you begin having problems like this. It must be old age grumpiness. And I let it go at that. But I could understand why other people would have similar rage type problems, because indeed I was then 4 years ago when I found out I was a targeted individual. I also began researching heavily about the MK Ultra and the modern day gang stalking, which is a greatly uh, much more powerful kind of thing, because the technology has drastically increased since it was outlawed by the Frank Church, thanks to the Frank Church Committee. But anyway, the point being that if they let the movie slip by somehow, slip by the censors, and we are told by people like L. Fletcher Proutty, who has great credentials, worked with 3 presidents and the CIA, and he worked as a liaison between the CIA and the presidents, sort of translating in his mind what was being, what they wanted to do, and letting the presidents know if this was the right thing to do or whatever. But anyway, he says that, and said in 1970, that the CIA controlled the country. He didn't say total control 100%, just control the country. And let it go at that. But not just our country and not just the CIA. They had some allies. CIA and their allies control the country, America, and the world, the entire world. And that's the title, full title, Secret Team, CIA and its allies in control of the United States and the world. And that's a very, very big statement, but he backs it up in this book very well, and another book. And what we have to ask ourselves is if they are in control of the media and the corporations and the Congress, is there anything that is not going to be under their thumb?
The entertainment world.
Well, yes, the entertainment very much controlled and has been for a very, very long time. So what would be the problem with if they realized that too much was being said about MK Ultra being shown about this program? What could they do other than just somehow banning the entire movie? They could detract from it uh, by pointing a finger or two at the main character and saying, this this person's character is not perfect. This person has, on several occasions, shown that he is capable of being angry, very angry, very hostile, or something like that. And I thought, as I read the gang stalking, COINTELPRO, MK Ultra literature, they could do this with anyone. Simply with directed energy, which is electronic or microwave energy, uh, uh, hitting the right areas of your brain or just bathing the body with the right frequencies. Frequency of sound is something they have perfected as a weapon. But anyway, I'd better stop talking here and let Dr. Phil has taken some notes, I think, that she'll just mention in passing of the other kinds of uh, things that were mentioned in the film that were maybe also a little too much. Other than just MK Ultra, there were all these other things that have not, to this day, been fully ironed out and addressed, such as, I remember one, the presidential assassination, and a number of leaders assassinated, and that the question marks just about these assassinations are still out there, in fact, in greater proliferation than ever, and we are told we cannot hear all the evidence because the country would not uh, be able to handle it. Well, I would like to make that decision on my own. You know, I would like to see this information, but anyway, the conspiracies that were noted in the movie, if you want to tell us about a
Well,
few.
certainly, yes. You've mentioned the assassinations, so I won't go into those, although I will say that one of those assassinations has been actually solved, and that was the assassination of Martin Luther King. His family finally got a court to overturn the supposed shooter of him and to pin the blame where it actually belonged.
I heard there was great disappointment too in the media coverage of that entire thing. You know, the government indeed responsible, and yet the media doesn't care.
Well, as we know, with Project Mockingbird, the CIA does have control of much of our media, and certainly they would not want to be implicated in something like that. And
Well, William Colby, the director, said they admitted that they or was bragging about it, I guess, controlled most everything.
yes, well, surveillance is one of the big issues today. Jerry Fletcher, the main character in the film, was surveilled by the villainous Dr. Jonas, who was continuing with his MK Ultra experimentation on Jerry until Jerry somehow managed to escape from the laboratory. And Dr. Jonas wants to find him, and so there is continual surveillance of Jerry and what he does, and there are helicopters, there are people on motorcycles, there are walkers, there are all kinds of things like that, and these kinds of things continue today with targeted individuals. They are surveilled possibly even more than the rest of the people in our country are.
Much more than what I gather. And this is an ever increase, instead of the problem being resolved in this spying and surveilling everybody all the time, making them worse, maybe if they had a problem. Instead of this getting better, it is just as revelations and whistleblowers have told us again and again, it's getting worse.
The arch villain, Dr. Jonas, of course, wears this Harvard ring that has the word VERITAS as part of the inscription. And VERITAS, of course, means truth. And Dr. Jonas is just a bald-faced liar. I mean, he tells one of the other characters in the film, I used to work with MK Ultra, but I don't do that anymore. Someone has stolen that technology, and there's someone out there that is using it, and I need to find Jerry in order to find out who that is. And of course, people swallow that story. Another thing about this ring and its inscription is it's a Harvard ring, and you wonder, why did they make such an issue of showing this ring and this term, besides the irony of the person wearing it? And it's because Harvard is one of the 40 universities that received the mind control manipulation grants. And there were a number of universities that did receive those.
My having spent quite a bit of time at Harvard, I kept wondering why the insistence on this ring. That's the one thing that I really remembered clearly from 20 years ago watching it.
Yeah. You've mentioned that it's very graphic, and the scenes that depict what goes on in the MK Ultra labs with these people who are virtually lab rats. And one thing that really resonates today is the waterboarding kind of thing that we have heard a good bit about. The main character in this film is essentially waterboarded. He's in a wheelchair, but he's dumped into a vat of water because he will not tell Jonas what Jonas wants to know. And then too, there is the scene of using the chemical, and you can perhaps talk about that, because
one of my favorite spots is Dr. Jonas, the evil, sort of stereotypical type Nazi almost, and he's filling a needle with a chemical or drug, and he says to Jerry Fletcher that this, Jerry, meaning what is in the needle, this, Jerry, will put my words into your mouth. And right there, the power of these mind-altering drugs or chemicals, that they, even back in whenever this was supposed to have been in the 80s or 90s, they already could put words into your mouth or actions. They could make you do whatever they wanted.
Certainly they could. They chose oftentimes as victims for these programs the creative, the intelligent people. And they did this perhaps because these are the individuals that are usually more individualistic, and they think for themselves. They don't play like sheep.
They're going to resist, and they're going to tell other people. They are oftentimes writers or movie producers or whatever. And these types are going to resist. But when that resistance is gone, what do we have left? A few, very 1/10 of 1% at the tip top. If you're a billionaire, multi-billionaire, trillionaire, you will be completely in charge of mindless slaves and sheep.
The military-industrial complex. Eisenhower warned us about it in, I guess, the late 60s or the late 50s, early 60s. It's still with us today. It has grown stronger. It has grown more opaque. And the programs such as MK Ultra have grown out of this military-industrial complex.
And then paramilitary. And Eisenhower did mention that President John F. Kennedy tried to do something about it. And a few days later, after his announcement,
he was no longer with us. Yes. The mental adaptation that's required of these people that are targets, that have been victims of this MK Ultra program. Today, there are several that have actually survived the ordeal, and yet they have had to adapt in ways that most of us could not possibly recognize in order to stay alive another minute, another hour, another year. And we see that the main character is like this. There's this resistance, there's this perseverance that it is a very human quality that keeps us going. We've said that this military-industrial complex has become so much more powerful and opaque, and the kinds of things they do. This MK Ultra program, for example, had the extreme power to program assassins, and the assassins would go and kill someone and then not even remember what they had done. And we find this out with several of the assassins that, or people who have attempted assassination and failed at it, that have come out
these
recently.
Groups that we're talking about, the coverts, are professional assassin groups, and that's one of their, other than just chaos, confusion, destruction. The other term is death. They are assassination groups right here in America. Anyway, so many of these assassinations have the patsies. It seems like that, they might have a gun that's been fired or something, but in many cases they suspect the real murders were done by people, by professional assassins that weren't even near the scene, maybe sharpshooters at a distance.
Yes. Well, and then also the programming makes the victims, like Jerry, for example, has many books called Catcher in the Rye, and he doesn't know why he buys them. He was just compelled to buy them. Several of the assassins or patsies that we've been talking about, same thing. They seem to have a copy of this book. In Jerry's case, it quite possibly was a way to locate him. The vilification of the targets. Jerry is vilified in the film. Jonas lies about him to other characters in the film. Poor Jerry is just totally discredited. He's called a murderer. He's not a murderer. He's anything but. He has been programmed to be one, but the programming, for some reason, did not take.
Of course, vilified, just as he was in the movie, demonized, vilified for something that maybe was not his fault, probably was not his fault at all, if they were using directed energy. And this is no big deal. They have been doing this for 50 years. In the last decade or so, it has probably been so perfected that it can do masses of people is what we hear.
Well,
Some people are.
we actually know that it can. As a matter of fact, in the 1991 Desert Storm conflict, the Iraqi soldiers were bombarded with the frequencies that made them give up, just totally give up. These people were seasoned warriors. They were seasoned warriors, and yet they threw down their arms and went to the ground and kissed the boots of the soldiers that.
Something that shocked the entire world because it was so unlikely, and yet the strength of these directed energy rays is so great. They're and it's not just that. And people say, well, we just need to work on getting rid of this directed energy. That's not the problem. It's the whole entire program by many, many, many agencies that unless we get all of it, which we must do, or it's just going to get worse. And the coincidence is just too great for this to be happening to the main character in this film, and then happening in real life. That is the kind of little twist that some of the agencies are known for. Right in their face. Do it in the face. Rub their nose in it, is the expression I've heard at least a couple of times.
Yeah. The institutional dangers are still with us today. We in the film, charts switched, and Jerry's chart is switched with that of the man in the room with him, and the next day that man is dead. Jerry knew that would happen, and he asked for the chart to be switched. But there's also the manipulation of authorities, and if indeed the CIA, as Prouty tells us, is in control, then they walk into even the Justice Department in the film here. They walk in and say, I need you people to help me locate Jerry Fletcher. And so they go right along with it. Earlier, they have dropped a murder case because they were told to do so. And instead of the actual murderer being located, the murder was pinned on a patsy. And the person who wanted to pursue this investigation was told, no, it's ended. We're told that's all. And so, of course, these agencies are being controlled by someone who has a little bit more power. And that's very, very frightening for us as normal everyday citizens to realize that if we are on the wrong side of this agency or this person in control or that person in control, that our lives can be turned upside down because somebody steps in and
in my case, just blowing a very loud whistle about something that was illegal. In fact, I didn't know about the term blowing a whistle, but several of the writers did. In fact, I have a copy right here, blowing the whistle on the cover of this magazine. I don't know if that's going to show, but here I was doing what I thought was simply the legal correct thing to do, and the next thing I know is my world has turned upside down to the extent that I was given another 2.5-year contract as a superintendent, and I decided that there was no way I could continue with that. But anyway, getting to how much control they have. Fletcher Prouty says that changing administrators is just a waste of time, as past history sadly reveals. Now he's saying that in 1970 in this book, and has the credentials to know about what he's saying. 1970, imagine what it is in this day and age.
In the film, there's reference to the metadata banking, and the archvillain, Jonas, wants to know everything that he possibly can about the woman that Jerry is interested in. I want to know the name of her kindergarten teacher. What most of us don't seem to realize is that almost everything that we do is in some kind of data bank somewhere, and that information is available. Even our biological data is available to anyone in the covert world who might want to use it for one purpose or another.
Or use it against us, as one whistleblower recently said. Maybe it was Bill Benny that said it first, but Dan Bongino, I think, also said that that they have this information, they are getting it daily, and they're not getting it to let it sit there, and they are going to use it against us.
There are hundreds of millions of dollars that have to be spent on a program like MK Ultra back when. Can you imagine today how much money must be being spent on the individuals that are targeted, just to keep an eye on them, to surveil them, to follow them, to increase their anxiety, these kinds of things.
I am nonplussed every day at just the amount of gasoline when I go. I have to take trips occasionally. There might be what seems to be hundreds of vehicles on the road that should not be there. And you know, after 55 years of driving, about what to expect in the way of traffic and conditions and driving habits and things like that. And when all of it is repeatedly what it shouldn't be, you know.
Right. NASA is linked to the directed energy weaponry that can cause earthquakes, possibly also have some influence on weather patterns so that we can utilize weather warfare, those kinds of things, geological warfare, tsunamis, earthquakes, other kinds of disasters of this sort. Not only is that mentioned in the film itself, but we hear more and more about these topics today. Apathy about the truth. Why would that be the case? Part of it is probably because of the use of the various chemicals that are in our food, our water, the medicines that we take, that create a kind of apathy in the individual, that tamp down our desire to do things, to discover, to learn, to what we want to do is go to work for 8 hours, come home, have our supper, get in front of the television for 4 or 5 hours, and
be passively
assaulted in that way. And that's another medium to create a kind of apathy. So if there's apathy about the truth, it is because of everything that is coming at us from outside to create that apathy in us, and it's part of this plan to make the enslaved populace to serve those in power. Well, that's about all that I want to mention, I believe.
Plenty, and I know there's a lot more there. We're deliberately leaving out many of the items that were mentioned in this. The conspiracy theory. Would you just
Oh,
mention
okay.
that?
Yes, I meant to do
You
that
know about
earlier
that.
and did not. Um, the the CIA in the 60s became somewhat worried about the many theories that were cropping up about these people who had been assassinated. And um, so they decided, well, you know, what we really need to do is put this word conspiracy together with the word theory. Now, as we know from studying history, all of us know this. I mean, everybody goes to school and learns this. There have been conspiracies throughout mankind's
From
past.
day one
Day
till
one,
now.
conspiracies. So they're for real, but the CIA decided, well, now if we put this together with conspiracy theory, well, and we'll say that anybody that comes up with one of these theories is a crackpot. And the that idea persists today. Uh, if you go out and you talk to people on the street and you mention conspiracy theory, oh yeah, that's something that such and such a crackpot had.
Well, you say the word. Okay, there's possible conspiracy here about the weather warfare patterns. Oh, you mean another one of those theories, or if you mentioned 9/11, we've been programmed. In fact, we were all, well, including Dr. Bob Bowman, I think, uh, for the first few years, we were totally brainwashed with what the media had told us about the 9/11 situation. But now it is there is so much information there that we were not told that is uh, at odds with their uh, their reporting. It's amazing. But
Right.
anyway, I want to get to the ending of this. Didn't you like the happy ending where everybody was
Well, yeah.
live at least after being shot several times? Jerry Fletcher is getting better, and his the one he loves has found out he is alive, and maybe they can get together if they don't find out that Jerry is alive. How do you? That doesn't make sense. How do you hide nowadays when everybody's chipped and bio API'd and where you have a total radar system in your, I mean a radar in your body system. How can you hide the fact that you're alive? Maybe that wasn't possible back in the API back in 1997. One of the items here that really gave me pause after I saw it 20 years later was that the victim of MK Ultra, Jerry Fletcher, had a special agency here to help him. Not only help him stay away uh, from the MK Ultra crowd, but to help him get his total system back in working order. And evidently, his mind had been fragmented through this uh, through this assault on his mental faculties. But anyway, in reality, uh, there is no such agency, and if there were such an agency, I think it would have to be suspect after so many of our agencies being entangled, totally inseparable, working together against the citizenry, as we said in this gang stalking and MK Ultra, COINTELPRO. They work together. They don't work in. They give a pretense sometimes of being at odds, but it's when it's them versus us, them is going to stick together. When you're blacklisted, what happens to you? I mean, do you have access to much of anything?
People don't believe anything you say because you're vilified. You're a villain. You're horrible. You're this. You're that. And so your words.
Well, there's that, but then even more directly, they will make marketing or reaching huge numbers of people just impossible,
Mm.
physically impossible to do. And thinking, how can that be? You can, you can go right to the internet and get along. Well, that works sometimes, and other times it may not. But in reality, all of this coincidence is too much for me. One one targeted individual long term has done over 1,000 videos about the progression of his targeting, and I haven't seen them all, but they're very powerful and very informative and unbelievable at times, even though you're seeing it. And that's what it's such horrible, horrible program that we cannot believe it. It's like the Nazi concentration camp things. We see the pictures and it's hard to conceptualize. How could people do this? Or the lynch party, the huge, monstrous lynching parties they would have for the African Americans, and people out picnicking as they're torturing and murdering. I mean, that's so hard to believe. We can't digest it. We can't conceptualize. So, maybe with repeated exposure, something will get better. I don't think it can last too much longer the way it is. I think there are too many people like myself that are not going to let it drop easily.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening.